Early voting is underway in Georgia for two hotly contested Senate runoff seats. The winners of those contests will, of course, determine which party controls the entire U.S. Senate. Democrat Reverend Raphael Warnock is facing off against Republican Kelly Loeffler, and Democrat John Ossoff is challenging GOP incumbent David Perdue. The runoff is slated for January 5th, but let's go ahead and dig in with Emma Hurt. She's a reporter at the NPR station WABE in Atlanta. Emma, thanks for being with us. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris will campaign in Georgia next week. What will her message be for voters there?
You know, the message that President-elect Joe Biden brought to Georgia last week and that we would expect to come from Vice President-elect Harris is that this is still about Donald Trump, because as we know, Donald Trump lost Georgia very narrowly, but he did. And so even though the Republican Senate candidates in November did better than President Trump, the hope is that for Democrats that they can remind voters that this is still about President Trump. And this is still about President-elect Biden's administration. If they want any of Biden's policies to be enacted, then they need to vote Democratic again, even if they might have voted Republican in the Senate in November.
Well, Emma, you mentioned President-elect Biden's visit. In addition, President Trump and Vice President Pence have also visited the state in recent days. The late House Speaker Tip O'Neill pretty famously said that all politics is local, but both sides are making these runoffs national, obviously because there are national implications, but at a most fundamental level, Georgia voters, local voters, are going to be deciding this election. So how much does this national appeal really play for voters there in Georgia?
That's really the big question, because you're right. Both sides really have nationalized these races. It's sort of long gone. It's a foregone conclusion at this point, just with all the pressure. But I think that there will still be Georgians who are voting for their issues, who are voting for their Georgia senators, because at the end of the day, that's what they'll have, is their representative in the Senate, even though the entire country is putting pressure on them. I mean, every voter I talk to, it feels like, is saying, I'm getting postcards from people in California and Michigan and New York telling me who to vote for. And it's just overwhelming. And the level of text messages and mailers and all of that is really making this feel to Georgians like much more than their own election, even though that's technically what it still is.
Well, many Republicans, as you know, are still not acknowledging Joe Biden as president-elect. And you mentioned President Trump. I was interviewing a former member of the Trump administration, Joe Grogan, on air earlier this week, and he was making a big point of the fact that even though President Trump didn't win the election at the very top of the ticket, that Republicans did very well in all these down-ballot races. I'm wondering how things look for Republicans there in Georgia. Are they feeling optimistic, given that they did do well, even if the top line, President Trump, is no longer on the ballot? Might that serve them well?
You know, I think it might have if President Trump had conceded the race and sort of stepped back into the background a little bit, but he's continuing to force Republicans to stand by him in a way and continuing to make himself the center of this story, because the November election in his mind still isn't finished. And some Republicans have said to me, and Democrats have said to me, Republicans would have a lot easier of a time right now without that distraction, because his election fraud claims are making some people question whether the system will be secure in January, even though there's not been evidence of that, because he has been criticizing Georgia's top Republican officials for not supporting those claims to a certain extent, which is just very confusing for Republican voters. And it's not a united front that I think Republicans around the country would hope to have and are trying to force at this point. But President Trump has really drawn a line for the Republican Party in Georgia, and it's weakened the party to the point that these are looking a lot closer than one might expect, given how things went in November for the Republican Senate candidates.
Yeah, to that point, we have heard President Trump really go after these Georgia elected officials. Republicans call into doubt the results of the election, the the entire electoral process in Georgia, in part because President-elect Biden outperformed President Trump in a state that normally goes red. Given that early voting is hitting record numbers, how does all this play into what you're seeing? Do you currently have a clue about who might have an advantage right now, if that's Republicans who are upset about how their state went in the national election and are feeling galvanized right now by President Trump's words, or by Democrats who feel like we've done it once, we can do it again?
It's going to be close. I mean, I've been asking this question of everybody, right? And no matter what the answer is, whether they think Republicans have the edge or Democrats, everyone agrees it's going to be close. And I think President Trump's election integrity questions have kind of thrown a wrench into it, whereas ordinarily, before starting out, Republicans have a stronger message, one could argue, about divided government, about checks and balances in Washington. But the question is, how many voters might stay home because they're confused and they're frustrated about the system because of the fraud claims that they are being told about? And that really throws off the calculus that might be what to be expected going into this. The Democrats are still very motivated by the top of the ticket, but the question is really what's going to happen on the Republican side with all this uncertainty.
And Emma, given that that both of the Senate seats are actually up for election, that there are 4 candidates in this election, there have also been some negative charges made against some of the people who are running right now. Some allegations of corruption. Is there any sense? I'd like to look at these 4 individuals as, in fact, individuals and not just Republican or Democrat, because I think that there's a lot of people, usually, at least in local elections, that are casting their ballot based off of the person. Can you tell us anything more about the 4 people and who seems to be resonating and picking up steam with voters and who is really struggling right now?
You're right. They do kind of seem like caricatures at this point because there's been so much money spent on both sides to boost them and to attack them. So it is difficult to find the nuance sometimes. But for the kind of regularly scheduled Senate race between Senator David Perdue, Republican, and Democrat John Ossoff, those two have been battling it out for the better half of this year. And they've debated twice, and they've really thrown barbs at each other to the point where there's not much that's new that's being said to each other. But what's been new is the other race, because Senator Kelly Loeffler, the Republican incumbent, was in a special election. She had a hard challenger from the right until November, and she didn't really have time to think about the Democrat in a way because she was trying to win Republican voters. And now she is facing one-on-one Reverend Raphael Warnock, who's the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, Martin Luther King Jr.'s home church. Loeffler is a businesswoman who was appointed about a year ago, who did not have political experience. And so we're really seeing them battle it out in a new way. And we're seeing them, take a more prominent stage with voters, I think, because that special election had 20 people on the ballot, and it was a lot. So now we have those two, and they're both attacking each other in new ways, and voters are learning about them in new ways.
As we are all learning about these candidates nationally. Emma Hurd, thank you so much.
Thank you.